The people of Argentina now are beginning at long last to unravel the mystery of the disappeared.
The remains of many of the disappeared are being found in unmarked graves throughout the country. Many of the bodies show signs of torture.
During the military dictatorship in Argentina from 1976 to 1983, as many as 30,000 people simply disappeared without a trace. Some of those taken were young pregnant women. Kept alive until they gave birth, at least 500 of their babies were then given to couples who were deemed sympathetic to the regime.
Pensaron estos depredadores que nosotros las mujeres éramos débiles y que nos íbamos a quedar en nuestra casa llorando con miedo. Y se equivocaron.
It's a story that's still playing out today, nearly 40 years after it began.
It's so easy to relate. They kidnapped my daughter. She was pregnant. Where's my grandchild? It's the most basic human story in the world.
A three-man military junta has taken over the government of Argentina.
The coup began in the early morning hours of March 24, 1976.
The action was swift and efficient, and the new ruling junta, composed of coup leaders, seemed in firm control.
It wasn't long before the military dictatorship started rounding up guerrilla groups and those believed to be left-wing subversives.
The military went to where the person worked or to the university, or maybe the person was walking in the street, and then it's like the earth had swallowed them.
Isabel Mignone-del Carril's sister was one of the first to be taken.
Social worker Monica Mignone disappeared in 1976. She was organizing resistance to a government slum demolition project. Miss Mignone was 24.
I am totally pessimistic about the fate.
My father told us, that they had probably killed her. They would take them, get information out of them, and then get rid of them. The only ones that were really kept were the women that were pregnant.
They considered these women, and certainly the fathers of these unborn children, to be communists, and there was a danger that they would raise these children as communists. So they quickly came up with the idea, we're going to let them give birth, then we're going to kill the mother, and then we're going to hand over the children to proper Catholic families to raise as their own. The kids will never know.
Housewife and school principal Estela de Carlotto was 47 years old back in November of 1977 when her 22-year-old daughter, Laura, disappeared.
Fue la primera de mis 4 hijos. Laura fue una chica muy respetuosa, pero muy fuerte de personalidad. Entró en una militancia política porque quería cambios.
Carlotto says she was frantic to find out what had happened to her daughter.
En ese momento, yo era igual que las otras madres, muy inocente. Nosotros no sabíamos que estos militares venían a matar gente. Nosotros esperábamos el regreso de nuestros hijos.
But it was not to be. Carlotto would never hear from her daughter Laura again. In August of 1978, she was killed by her captors. Although devastated, Estela de Carlotto was one of the more fortunate ones. She was given her daughter's body to bury. It was 2 years later that she learned something she had suspected. Laura had been pregnant and given birth to a son before she was murdered.
Yo enterré a Laura. Sabía dónde estaba Laura, pero no sabía dónde estaba mi nieto.
Not long after, she joined the grandmothers or abuelas of the Plaza de Mayo.
Sola era peligroso, no compartía mi dolor. O sea, encontrar a las abuelas fue encontrar compañía, intercambiar ideas y cuidarnos entre nosotras.
The mothers were looking for their dead children. The abuelas were looking for their live grandchildren. That was the difference. They were parallel organizations.
Every Thursday, Both groups would march in silent protest around the Plaza de Mayo, the famed city square that sat opposite the presidential palace. It wasn't long before their silence began to be heard around the globe.
Their brave work demonstrated to the whole world that something horrible was going on in Argentina.
The dictatorship lasted 7 years. During that time, as many as 30,000 people were tortured and killed at detention camps all over the country. While many of the victims were buried in mass graves, nearly 5,000 were taken to a camp known simply as the ESMA.
At the beginning, they would set up huge bonfires and cremate the bodies. Once the number of people captured started growing, that was no longer a viable method. So then they decided to use military planes. They would drug the prisoners at the ESMA till they were in a kind of half awake, half asleep state, load them on the planes, and throw them into the Atlantic Ocean.
After the regime fell, the grandmothers were desperate to not only find out what had happened to their children, but to also recover their grandchildren who had been stolen at birth.
They had like an intelligence agency. They worked like detectives already during the dictatorship.
Their search would take them to New York and the office of exiled Argentine geneticist Victor Penchaszadeh.
Their question was, is it possible to identify children even if you don't have their parents?
The answer was yes. They could match genetic markers in blood samples from any living grandparents, aunts, or uncles.
Al principio buscábamos, pero no teníamos pruebas de cuál era el nieto.
So they turned to science, and in 1987, they began storing their profiles in a newly created National Genetic Bank. By then, they had already found 39 missing grandchildren.
The truth is the truth. I mean, it's the ethical basis for all what the abuelas have been doing.
And that search for truth would lead to something the generals had never imagined.
A civilian court in Argentina today convicted 5 former military leaders accused of murder, torture, and other charges.
Much of the evidence gathered against the regime came from the grandmothers and the mothers. Their work with forensic experts in the often painful process of finding and identifying the remains of their children would help secure convictions against the former dictators. By May of 2014, Estela de Carlotto and the grandmothers had found or identified 113 missing grandchildren, and at the age of 83, her determination to continue the search that began in 1978 with the murder of her daughter seemed stronger than ever.
Nunca voy a dejar de hacer lo que estoy haciendo, porque hay adentro una fuerza muy grande, que es el amor por los hijos, el amor por los nietos.
Empecé a tener conocimiento de las abuelas y también de Estela de Carlotto ya cuando egresé de la escuela secundaria y fui a estudiar a un conservatorio de música.
Ignacio Herbán was born in June of 1978. His parents were farmers near the city of Olivaria, some 220 miles from Buenos Aires. A few years ago, Ignacio says he was at home watching television.
Aparece en la imagen la figura de Estela, y yo le comento, qué pena esta mujer, toda una vida buscando y quizás nunca encuentre a su nieto.
On his 36th birthday in 2014, Ignacio found out that he had been adopted at the height of the dictatorship.
Fue un shock, sí. Mis padres de crianza no fueron los que me dijeron. Cuando les pregunté, ellos ratificaron lo que me habían contado, me apoyaron y estuvieron de acuerdo en todo el tiempo mientras yo decidí salir a buscar quién era mi familia biológica.
He is an accomplished musician and director of a music conservatory. While he says he was stunned to learn of his adoption, he cannot deny that growing up, he did have some doubts.
Las sospechas fueron el parecido físico, que no existía, fundamentalmente, y después algunas cuestiones de decisiones que tomé en mi vida que no eran las que hubieran tomado mis padres de crianza.
Not long after his discovery, Ignacio went to the grandmothers, who arranged for a blood test. The results were sent to the National Commission for the Right to Identity, the government agency that the grandmothers lobbied for to restore their grandchildren's family heritage. In August of 2014, just days after taking the test, Ignacio got the results from the head of the commission.
Me dijo de quién era nieto, y mi abuela me estaba esperando, muy emocionada. Nos encontramos inmediatamente al otro día. No había mucho más para esperar. Ya había esperado demasiado.
Dentro de su carácter bonachón que tiene y simpático, dijo, muy en broma, por supuesto, si yo soy nieto de las abuelas, por lo menos que sea Estela mi abuela. Él ya parecía que lo presentía.
The country came together, I think, in this huge cry of joy. I went to the press conference where she appeared publicly with them for the first time, and there's a room packed full of journalists, all in tears, myself included, because she represented so much for us. I mean, she had been so brave, she'd put so much of herself at stake, and finally, she had a reward.
And for her grandson, the reward would be twofold. The genetic bank didn't just reveal the identity of his mother, it would make known for the first time the name of his father, Walmir Montoya. Montoya's remains were identified in 2009, and his profile was then stored in the genetic bank where it quietly remained until Ignacio's DNA was entered. The result was immediate and indisputable.
Entonces la noticia vino por partida doble. De esa manera no solamente se esclareció quién era el nieto, sino además quién era el padre de ese nieto.
But with those results came something else. The parents who raised him would face a legal investigation.
Cada vez que encontramos un nieto, interviene la justicia, entiende que hay un matrimonio que ha cometido un delito. Ellos inexorablemente tienen que ser juzgados por la justicia. Bueno, esas personas que criaron a mi nieto han cometido un delito. Es un delito grave, delito de lesa humanidad. Tienen atenuantes de que eran personas del campo, que tenían un patrón que los dominaba y que les trajo un día un niño y les dijo, no pregunten y nunca le digan que no es hijo de ustedes. Pero yo, personalmente, no los culpo ni los exculpo. Eso está en manos de la justicia.
Ignacio Herban is now Ignacio Montoya Carlotto. Although he has changed his name, he says his bond with the parents who raised him remains strong, and he is proud to be the 114th grandchild identified. Since Ignacio, 3 more grandchildren have also been found. Hundreds more remain missing. At the age of 84, Estela de Carlotto shows no sign of slowing down, taking her message and now her grandson around the world.
Hay mi vida pública con mi abuela, y la vida privada y afectiva con ella, que es una vida que vamos construyendo. En ese sentido, tan solo somos el nieto y una abuela.
Cuando encontré a mi nieto y lo pude abrazar, no se parece físicamente a su mamá, pero yo sabía que en la sangre de él estaba mi hija Laura, y fue como recuperarla.
Sitting on the riverbank in Buenos Aires is a memorial, a tribute to the thousands of people who were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. For Argentines, it is a stark reminder of a dark and not so distant past.
Este encuentro es el cierre de mi búsqueda personal, pero yo voy a seguir como abuela de Plaza de Mayo mientras tenga vida, buscando todos los nietos que faltan y además buscando la verdad y la justicia.